Episode 100. Did COVID-19 escape from a lab? And did governments know? Welcome back to the Conspiracy Theory Analyst. I'm Robin. In December 2019, a cluster of unusual pneumonia cases appeared in Wuhan, China. By March 2020, the World Health Organization had declared a global pandemic. By the end of 2021, more than 5 million people were dead. By the end of 2023, that figure had exceeded 7 million. COVID-19 became the defining crisis of the early 21st century, and the question of where it came from has never been fully answered. The official scientific consensus, supported by multiple peer-reviewed studies and international investigations, holds that SARS-CoV-2 emerged naturally, that it originated in bats in southern China, passed through an intermediate animal host, and made its way to humans at or near the Huanan seafood market in Wuhan in late 2019. A competing theory, once dismissed as fringe and then elevated to the highest levels of government, holds that the virus did not emerge naturally at all. That it leaked, either accidentally or deliberately, from the Wuhan Institute of Virology, one of the world's leading coronavirus research facilities, located approximately 15 kilometers from that seafood market. Tonight we examine both positions, what the evidence shows, what remains unresolved, and why this question has become one of the most politically charged scientific debates of the modern era. Detailed explanation: the Wuhan Institute of Virology is a real and serious research institution. It has been studying bat coronaviruses for years, including conducting gain-of-function research, experiments that enhance the transmissibility or virulence of viruses in order to study them. The Institute's collaboration with American researchers, including through grants from the EcoHealth Alliance, funded by the U.S. National Institutes of Health, has been extensively documented. The proximity of the Institute to the initial outbreak is the central circumstantial element of the lab leak theory. Wuhan is a city of 11 million people, with multiple research facilities. The nearest wild bat populations carrying similar coronaviruses are located over 1,000 kilometers away in Yunnan province. The question of how a bat virus reached Wuhan's wet market, without any documented intermediate animal host being identified, is one that the natural origin theory has not fully resolved. In May 2025, a landmark international study published in the peer-reviewed journal Cell, led by the University of Edinburgh and involving researchers from 20 institutions across 3 continents, traced the origins of SARS-CoV-2 to bat populations in northern Laos and southwest China's Yunnan province, where its most recent ancestor circulated 5 to 7 years before the pandemic. The study was described as offering compelling evidence against a Wuhan laboratory origin. The Chinese government did not grant the study's researchers access to the Wuhan Institute's records or raw data. That access problem is central to the entire debate. Every investigation that has attempted to assess the lab leak hypothesis has been hampered by China's refusal to share complete records from the Wuhan Institute of Virology. The databases, the virus samples, the safety incident logs, and the medical records of staff who fell ill in late 2019. Core elements of the theory: the first element is the sick researchers. A declassified U.S. intelligence report confirmed that 3 researchers at the Wuhan Institute of Virology sought hospital treatment in November 2019, weeks before the official emergence of COVID-19 was acknowledged. China denied that any staff had shown COVID-19 antibodies. The discrepancy has never been resolved. The second element is the deleted database. In September 2019, the Wuhan Institute removed its online database of bat coronavirus samples, a database that had been publicly accessible for years. The removal was not publicly explained at the time. Chinese officials subsequently provided various explanations, including security concerns about hacking. The database has not been restored or shared with international investigators. The third element is the furin cleavage site. SARS-CoV-2 contains a feature called a furin cleavage site that makes it highly effective at infecting human cells. No closely related bat coronavirus has been found with this feature. Some virologists have argued that the furin cleavage site is consistent with laboratory manipulation. Others have argued it could have evolved naturally. The scientific community is genuinely divided on its significance. The fourth element is the intelligence assessments. The FBI and the U.S. Department of Energy both concluded, with varying degrees of confidence, that a laboratory leak was the most likely origin of the pandemic. The CIA and other intelligence agencies remained undecided. The White House released a declassified intelligence summary in 2023 that acknowledged the question remained unresolved. In 2025, the Trump administration declassified additional COVID origin documents, none of which produced a definitive conclusion. Evidence for and against the evidence for natural origin is supported by the preponderance of peer-reviewed scientific literature. Multiple independent genetic analyses have found that SARS-CoV-2 shows no signs of deliberate engineering. The Edinburgh study traced its evolutionary lineage to wild bat populations. The Huanan seafood market was identified as a likely site of early super-spreading events, with multiple animal stalls concentrated in the area where the earliest cases clustered. The evidence that keeps the lab leak theory alive is primarily the absence of a complete natural origin chain. No intermediate animal host has been confirmed, and the systematic obstruction of independent access to Wuhan Institute records. Intelligence agencies with access to classified information have reached different conclusions from the scientific mainstream. The deleted database and the sick researchers remain unexplained. A 2025 synthesis by governmental and independent intelligence reviewers concluded that unresolved circumstantial evidence and incomplete access to records maintain lab release as a plausible scenario, not confirmed, but not eliminated. Arguments in favor believers in the lab leak theory argue that the combination of the Wuhan Institute's research program, the proximity of the outbreak, the sick researchers, the deleted database, and China's refusal to allow independent investigation constitutes a pattern of evidence that cannot be dismissed as coincidence. They note that the scientific community's early and near-unanimous rejection of a lab leak hypothesis, including the suppression of discussion on social media platforms, was not based on evidence, but on political and institutional pressures. Several scientists who raised the possibility early have since acknowledged they self-censored out of concern about being labeled conspiracy theorists. They also note that the WHO-led investigation into COVID-19 origins was, by its own members' admission, heavily constrained by Chinese cooperation requirements and did not constitute a genuine independent assessment. Arguments against scientists who support natural origin argue that the genetic evidence is the strongest available and consistently points away from laboratory manipulation. They note that gain-of-function research does not produce the specific features observed in SARS-CoV-2, and that the furin cleavage site, while unusual, has evolutionary explanations that do not require laboratory intervention. They argue that the intelligence agency assessments made by agencies without virology expertise, working from incomplete classified information, should be weighted less than the peer-reviewed scientific literature produced by researchers who have spent careers studying these viruses. They also observe that absence of a confirmed intermediate host is not unique to COVID-19. The intermediate hosts for SARS and MERS took years to identify after those outbreaks. Public opinion and broader impact. The lab leak debate has permanently altered the relationship between scientific institutions, governments, and the public. The early suppression of the hypothesis, followed by its rehabilitation as a legitimate scientific question, damaged trust in institutional science in ways that extended far beyond the specific question of COVID-19's origins. If the scientific establishment dismissed a plausible hypothesis for reasons other than evidence, the question of what else it dismisses for similar reasons is a reasonable one to ask. The Chinese government's sustained refusal to allow genuine independent investigation is, regardless of what actually happened, the most significant ongoing obstacle to resolving the question. A government with nothing to hide would open its records. Conclusion: did COVID-19 escape from a lab? And did governments know? The scientific consensus, supported by the majority of peer-reviewed evidence, favors natural origin. The intelligence community is divided. The specific question of whether anyone knew in advance cannot be answered from the public record. For believers in the lab leak theory, the deleted database, the sick researchers, China stonewalling, and the early institutional suppression of the hypothesis are collectively more significant than any individual piece of evidence. For scientists who accept natural origin, the genetic evidence, and the evolutionary lineage studies outweigh the circumstantial arguments. What is certain is this: the complete records from the Wuhan Institute of Virology have never been examined by independent investigators. Until they are, the question cannot be fully closed. This is the Conspiracy Theory Analyst. I'm Robin. If tonight's episode made you think, please rate and follow on Spotify. Tomorrow on the Conspiracy Theory Analyst, the moon landing hoax. Why millions still don't believe it happened. That's next.